Welcome back to Open Range. We've been spending time talking about the ballot measures that are going to be on the November election, specifically Measure 2, 4, and 5. Today, we're going to focus on Measure number 2, which is a ballot initiative to restrict the people. The legislature came out with a ballot measure to make it more restrictive, to change the Constitution through initiated measure process. And recently, former governor and former Secretary of Agriculture for the United States, Ed Schafer, launched a campaign to work to defeat Measure number 2. And I wanted to get his perspective for all the viewers out there. So Ed, welcome to Open Range.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be with you. I love the introduction with the buffalo going across the little Missouri River out in the Badlands. That's a happy place.
My wife, every time she sees it, she'll say, "There goes Tom, Dick, and Harry." And so every time I see the three buffaloes going across, I go, "There goes Tom, Dick, and Harry."
Well,
but it's
at least
so funny.
He's not talking about your guests.
Yeah. So, Governor, let's talk about what's been going on in your life a little bit. Before we talk about Measure 2, just give us a little fill-in. I see you've been kind of out and about, and besides, you're still kind of staying active in the political process.
Well, it's just once that political process grabs you, it's hard to get out. You get trapped in it, and I love it and enjoy it. So it's easy to keep getting in. I'm actually trying to retire this year. I flunked retirement twice, and now I'm trying to cut back on some of my work and stuff. But I wanted to jump in on this Measure 2 deal because I'm a big proponent of the ability of people to get in and correct or overcorrect or push back on our government a little bit. And as I saw this Measure 2 unfold, it seemed to me, as you mentioned, we were putting some restrictions in front of the people to try to operate and direct their own government. And I just don't think that's a good idea.
You know, Ed, one thing I will say about you, you've been one of the few politicians in North Dakota that's been what I would call for we the people. I mean, people sometimes get a little out there on the edge politically in different areas, but you have consistently been around, fighting with the people when it came back to the Tea Party, pushing back against government overreach. And so you've always been a key spokesperson for the conservatives and for we the people. And I appreciate that about you, because not all politicians want to go there. You're more of a statesman than just a pure politician like many of our friends.
Well, it's an interesting thing, the politics of we all get engaged and involved in, and that's what gets you elected. But when you serve, I mean, the reason that we get involved in the political season is to serve the people, and we forget about that. We get all engaged in the politics and fighting each other and jumping up and down, and it's when you're there, really what it's all about is it's a people's government, is by the people and for the people. And we need to remember that the first tenet in our governor's office is we need to serve all the people all the time. And it doesn't mean I can't push in my values or incorporate my values and characters, especially from a Republican standpoint. But it's all about serving the people. And I grew up, and my family and my dad were always pushing, saying, you have to trust the people. The people are good. They'll always get there. Sometimes they're excruciatingly slow, but they do get out there. And, that's what our government's all about. It's got to be driven by the people. And I'm a real champion of that.
Our mutual friend, Robert Harms, who worked in your administration, has consistently said, and he's reminded me of it many times, that when he served with you, when you started the meeting, you would say, I might have been elected by Republicans in North Dakota and other North Dakotans, but now that we're serving, we serve all the people. And he'd always say, we have to hear out all points from all people and then govern from our principles, but at the same time, you're serving all the people. And I appreciate what you just said related to that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's important. We forget about that in politics today. And, too many people are in office who want the title or just want to get reelected or maybe think of it as a career or a job. And that's not service. That's not political service. And, we need to, I believe, drive our government with servant leaders and serving the people. And I think that's the most important thing we can do.
So, Ed, when you got involved with the whole Measure 2 again, I mean, we went down this road about 3 or 4 years ago, where as another Measure 2, where there was kind of like wanting to restrict Measure 2. Give us your perspective on why this is important from a, like a 30,000 foot view.
Well, I have to go a long way back, Gary, and that is to 1989, in the tax referrals that Bismarck businessman Kent French, put in place, and those are the tax referrals that were trying to knock back 3 different taxes that were put forth by the legislature. And I thought that was important, and that's kind of how I cut my teeth in the political arena, because I got involved with Kent and wanted to represent the people with what I felt was the unreasonable tax increases that the legislature and the governor kept saying, this is all we can do. It's our only choice. It's the only thing we can do is raise the taxes. And what became really apparent was the people were speaking and said, no, there's more you can do. And the government was playing hide the ball. They were saying, oh my gosh, and government's going to fall down. It's going to crash. You're not going to be able to have any services or even have any flowers on the Capitol grounds if we don't get these taxes. And it just, that whole process started me thinking, this is really important to have this safety valve of people being able to put their arms together, sign a petition, put something on the ballot to direct their government when government gets into an overreach. And they did in 1989, and I was involved in it. And it just opened my vision about how important it is for the people to be able to get involved in the direction of their government. So, I've always started there, and I've kept in that position. When I was in the governor's chair, we often took positions on what initiated measures were or referral measures were. And, I just kind of kept my hand in it, and coming again this time and saying, what problem are we trying to solve here? And does this solve a problem, or does it restrict people from giving their rights to have a government by the people and for the people?
Well, Ed, we're going to go to the break. And when we come back, I want to drill down on some of the specifics of Measure 2 and why you're opposed to it, because it's so important for the citizens to understand what the legislature is attempting to do, and specifically requiring 2 votes. It's absurd to me, but so I appreciate you coming out. We've been talking to Welcome back to Open Range. We're talking to former Governor Ed Schafer, Secretary of Agriculture as well, and who really led the charge to turn the state around and put the Republicans back in power in that Capitol. And frankly, they've not given up power since. So a lot of the Republicans need to be thanking former Governor Ed Schafer for where they're at today. But Ed, so here we are, you're governor, and when you were in legislature, there's different silos. Obviously, there's executive branch, legislative branch, judicial. And you understood the difference between being a governor and a legislative branch. But sometimes those legislators, they just kind of get out ahead of themselves a little bit and like that little power. And I remember when you were governor, you were willing to push back on that a little bit. And so this Measure 2 speaks to that very thing, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And I think, it's important to remember those 3 branches of government and the separation of them, but the ability and necessity of them working together. So I always believe that there should be a tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch, that they have different viewpoints. The legislature is made up of a microcosm of 53 counties or 47 different political districts, or I should say 49 different political districts. And so we have all this, and each of those little microcosms come together for the legislature and give them their view. The governor's view is for the whole state. The governor looks at an overview, what's good for the state, what's good for everybody here, instead of just a pocket of constituents. And, so there's that back and forth, and both of them are necessary. Both views are great, but sometimes the legislature gets out there and, they have their special expenditures that what they want to do. They want to have some initiatives that maybe, are generated by a constituent someplace and aren't really relevant to the whole state, or, a small piece of it is, or, there's just some different views, different things. And so they get out there, and sometimes they get out on a budget, and, sometimes they get out there on taxes, and sometimes they get out there that lose sight of the people. And in this case, the legislature seems to have some concerns about the initiated measure and some effect it's had on the state and in the Constitution. And I think some of their thoughts are true. I think some of their thoughts are real, about maybe some corrections that need to take place in how we do this. But in crafting this piece of legislation, they way overstepped, and they put barriers in place for the people to be able to drive and direct their government. And I think in this case, for instance, what problem do they solve by saying you have to vote twice? We have this one person, one vote idea in our country, and in our state, and people have that option or that right to have one person, one vote. And now they say, oh no, you have to vote twice. Well, why? I mean, what does that solve? If you have to vote in June and then have to vote again in November, what happens in between? What's different? I just don't understand that one at all. So that's a piece of it. There is a element of this initiated measure that says the Secretary of State gets to decide what the initiative is. What's the focus? What's the ballot of what goes on the ballot on the initiative? And I think the people should be able to say that, not the Secretary of State. I mean, we have a great Secretary of State. That's wonderful, but the Secretary of State is representing his office, not the people of North Dakota. The people should be able to initiate that effort. So, I just look at these elements that are in this piece of legislation that, there might be a couple pieces in there that are pretty good. On the other hand, they're doing a lot of things and kind of, like I said, overreaching or kind of really attacking the process of being able to go out, gather signatures, put a petition on, and go out and put it on the ballot and let the people speak. We ought to be letting the people speak on these things, not putting restrictions in front of them so they can't.
When you look at the idea that making it a little more restrictive and changing our Constitution versus just our century code, I mean, obviously those are two different issues, and I can appreciate preserving and making it a little bit more difficult to change our Constitution. I actually led an effort that I actually put quite a bit of my own money into, that he had to be a U.S. citizen to vote in all elections. And even though Secretary of State, and to your point about Secretary of State letting him make a determination, he said that wasn't necessary. But there were a lot of, like New York and California, were saying, on local elections, city, school board, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to be to vote for the U.S. Senate and Congress and president. But they were allowing non-citizens to vote in local races. So I felt it needed to be done. So I got a grassroots organization put together. We did it. But, to your point of the Secretary of State, he was making a determination. Now you don't have to do it because we're covered. Well, kind of, until somebody steps in and makes a change in the century code. Then you got a problem.
Or you get a different Secretary of State. It looks differently. It's yeah. I mean, and you mentioned New York and other places. Well, now Minnesota too, want non-citizens to be able to vote in all elections. So it just gets crazy out there. But I mean, we firmly believe that we have to drive our government by the people, by citizens of the United States of America, and citizens in our state, in our case. And, it's just so important to have us driving the government. I'm reminded, Gary, when I was elected, I became the 17th Republican governor, 17th Republican governor out of 50. And over the time when I was in office of 8 years, we moved that up to 38. I think it was 38 Republican governors. And I was at a conference out in New Hampshire, and answering questions, someone raised their hand and said, how are you able to move all this governors from big minority to a vast majority here in Republican governors? And I said, well, it's pretty simple. We're giving people the government that they ask for,
Wow.
And we need to keep that in mind.
Well, I think that's so important. And I think sometimes Republicans in North Dakota forget what you contributed to Republicans being in control. So our good friend, U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer, working together as a couple young 20-year-olds prior to you getting elected governor. Those were hard times, and people forget that. And the wave you brought of change in North Dakota, the way we do business, was a big deal. And they need to be reminded of it regularly. That's why I'm excited to have you on.
Well, it was fun too. It was fun to, as a Republican, to break 40 years of Democrat control of the state house.
Well, and you took out, when you initially did the House race against Byron Dorgan, you were back the next time and you were able to get the governor office back, which was so big deal. Now, Governor, we're going to go to the break because I want to come back. I know you're up to another little initiative that's outside of Measure 2. So I don't want to confuse the two, but I'd like to have you talk a little bit about what you're doing about for the people. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. We've been talking to former Governor Ed Schafer. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Range. We've been talking to former Governor Ed Schafer. Governor, I understand that you have a new initiative that you're working on besides helping defeat Measure 2 in this November ballot, about initiative related to the people. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been concerned as I've seen our government unfold here. And of course, I always measure it from when I got out of office in 2000. But we've seen big growth in government. We've seen lots more employees. We've seen growth in everything. We've grown our government more than our population. We've grown our government more than the gross domestic product. We've grown our government bigger than any kind of measurement, personal income, any kind of measurement you want to put on it. And as I'm seeing that, and maybe it's just because Republicans have been in office too long or have too much power or something, but I really feel that we're starting to block people out of the process. And it's hard. It's even hard to get into the Capitol today. You have to find a door that's open and go through all kinds of stuff in the people's building, to get in. It's difficult to be able to testify in front of legislative committees to get it set up and get there at the times that they have and go through the restrictions that they have on testifying. I just feel that we're starting to get away from the people. And, one of the reasons, Gary, I felt that way is it was different when I started in office and 8 years later when I left office. The longer I was there, the mechanics and the issues and the schedules and the demands of the office, the longer you're there, the farther you get away from the people. And that bothered me then, and it still bothers me that now I think our whole government's getting farther away from people. So I want to put together something we're calling the People's Caucus. And the People's Caucus, we're trying to go out, find people all over the state and put together an organization to where if there's a tax issue, if there's a business issue, if there's any kind of social issue, something that's going in front of the legislature that has some controversy, that has some impact on people, that has some long-term ramifications to the state. We want to be able to turn to an organization, a grassroots organization out there and say, hey, here's what the people are thinking. Your constituents, your people, your citizens, the people you're responsible to, here's what they're thinking. Not a poll, not a headline in the paper, not whatever. I mean, this is what people, when they're having coffee together, when they're standing in the elevator talking, when they're, in a grocery store or gas station chatting about what they believe in, what they think in, this is the kind of information we want to gather and be able to present to the legislative process so that we kind of really can get that people's element back into the generation and the development of our government.
Well, being a republic and a representative government, there is a place, as we're still a democratic country, in the process of the people being able to weigh in. And you're absolutely right. You become insulated. And I mean, that's why I supported the term limits. I don't necessarily like the 8 years, but some of these legislators have been in there for 35, 40 years. They kind of think they own the place. They think they're in charge of everything, and they forget who they work for. It's the people. And the idea of putting something like this together is fascinating. So have you initiated this initially? Do you have a website up so people can find out about it? Or when you launch it, we'll be sure to have you back to help people know how do they get involved?
Well, this is in the discussion phase right now.
All right.
We're a few people and myself are just kind of chatting in and how you can put it together. You got to raise some dough to to be able to put it in place. So really, it's an idea and a concept right now, but it's something that, I'm committed to and want to get done.
So, Governor, one of the things that drives me crazy, I take a lot of heat for it because I pick on my Republican friends because there's no Democrats, I have a hard time finding someone to come on and talk to them. There just aren't enough of them. So the battle's in our family, if you will. And so sometimes I get critical of our family because they're afraid to have a debate. And I don't mean it in a, campaigns are about fighting it out and then coming together and getting another Republican elected and fighting for your values and your principles. And it's bothered me because we've continued to take platforms and resolutions and they just narrow them down, that pretty soon we want to stand for three things so we can do whatever we want to once we're elected. And I got a problem with that because you join a party because you have these aligned values. And over the years, I remember Kevin Kramer and I fighting these young guys on a pro-life position against, liberal Republicans that supported abortion. But when we got all done, we came together and had to work together to win elections. And do you think we've gone too far away from that? Do you think there's too much infighting? Talk to us a little bit about to Republicans and maybe a little bit, maybe you can even scold me a little bit if you want, but the whole idea of Republicans, I mean, I feel like we've lost our way.
Well, I think there's an element there, that's important. And I'm glad you brought up the subject because really as Republicans, we can still have differences of opinion. We can still have different ideas. And, I remember when I was able to get the nomination for the Republican Party and was running for governor and had proposed some elements of how to fund education without raising taxes. The first people who attacked me, Gary, were Republican senators. They were saying, no, you can't get the money there and you can't do it. We're here. We know everything. And then, they felt that way. They were there. They were kind of captive to the system and saying, oh, this is all we can do. And then outside viewpoint said, maybe we can do something different. So, there's always that element of different view. And what I boil it down to is the Republican legislature is Republican, but it's the legislature versus the executive branch. And we happen to kind of have just Republican legislature now, so that's kind of where the difference of opinions go. But, if you look at it, the legislature is a one-time deal. They go into session, they have a top line of revenue, they have a bottom line of expenditures, and they have to make that happen. They have to say, we have to balance the budget, we have to take our revenues, we have to allocate them out, we have to come in the end with a balanced budget. And so that's their perspective. It's a one-shot deal in the legislative session, in and out. The governor's office or the executive branch, with the elected officials too, have to look at saying, no, this is a long-term ramification. This is how it affects the culture and the development of our society. These are the things that are important to as we create the forward-looking state, how it's going to be delivered, how services and products are going to be delivered to the people, how people are going to be taken care of, how the health, education, and safety are going to unfold over a long period of time. So there's a totally different perspective of the legislature and the executive branch, and that needs to be molded and shaped and argued and discussed and final product put together that's best for all the people all the time. And so I think it's an executive branch, legislative branch viewpoint. Today, it's Republican versus Republican because that's all we have, so it tends to be, these Republicans are fighting, but really it's not a fight. It's a development of public policy through discourse of all sides, taking pieces from both sides, putting together for the best possible product. And that happens to be today Republican against Republican. So the news and the angst and the polling and everything, says it's Republican versus Republican. When really it's not. It just happens to be that we have Republican dominance right now.
Governor, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to have you back when you announce your We the People caucus. That's going to be very important for us. I appreciate your fight you're leading on Measure 2 and getting the information out. I'm going to have you back because we need more of your statesmanship and your wisdom. So I appreciate you coming on Open Range today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Great to be with you.
Thank you very much. So we've been talking to former Governor and Secretary of Agriculture and statesman, Ed Schafer. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. Thanks for watching.